All right.
Good morning. Welcome to the Coastside Land Trust's series of 6 bird activities, virtual webinar walks, workshops with Alvaro. I'm Jo Chamberlain, the Coastside Land Trust Executive Director, and we are delighted to welcome all of you. And you are in for quite a treat, as you know, because Alvaro Jaramillo is a world-renowned birder. He's an author of several books, and I'm sure many of you have had the opportunities to spend time with him in workshops and walks. Today's webinar is about backyard birds, and Alvaro will tell us about the schedule of how we'll go through the presentation today. Alvaro?
Hi, how are you, everyone? Thanks, Jo. It's always a pleasure for me to do things for the Coastside Land Trust because they're the group that is doing work right where I live. I mean, exactly at the end of my street, there's some of the land that's being preserved there that I go watching birds in is due to the work of the Land Trust. So, you know, thanks, Jo, and everybody who's associated with Land Trust in terms of keeping our coastside, you know, green, birdy, and good for bugs and plants and so forth. So we have this set of, you know, short talks. Maybe it's going to be about half an hour. Then we'll have a question period at the end. And we'll also, you know, if you have, you know, burning questions as you go along and you want to type them in, if I can get to them at that point during the talk, I will. If not, I'll leave them towards the end. So we have an hour, but you know, we can first go through the imagery and the talk, and then deal with some of the questions. This first one's going to be about backyard birds, and then the next one will be a little broader, sort of birds around the neighborhood, and I'll tell you what part of the world we're talking about if you're not a local, and then we'll expand to other different bird groups and places, you know, birding the beach and the harbor versus the forests and the songbirds and so forth. So that's the plan. And you know, my company is called Alvaro's Adventures. If you haven't heard of it, you can go to alvarosadventures.com and look at all the trips and other activities, tours, pelagic trips that we're doing. And I'll talk to you about that at the end too. So here we go. Let's see. So we're going to be talking about the coast side, Central California, Half Moon Bay area, San Mateo County in California. This is where we're based. And this is Pillar Point, which is one of sort of the most easily recognizable places in our neck of the woods, and also well known by surfers as being one of the best places in the world for big wave surfing. Mavericks is the big wave that sort of sets up on the outside of this peninsula. It's also, for us, one of the best birding spots in all of North America. We have amazing bird watching activity possibilities here. And if you live here and you're new at this, or if you're sort of a California coastal person, and you're really kind of starting to get into this, one thing you might not know, because you just happen to live here, is that this is actually one of the best places in North America to be watching birds. So you happen to live in sort of in the same way that, you know, if you're a surfer, you have mavericks beside you there that you can at least watch, or sort of, you know, even maybe try it if you're really good. It's just the same thing with birds. We have that level of bird abundance, quality, diversity in this part of the world. So we really are in a lucky place to be, you know, interested in birds. We've got the coast, we've got the hills, we have, you know, grasslands, forest, all that kind of thing, as well as sort of backyard habitats. Well, the reason that I'm giving these talks is because I live here, so you know, I know the place, but also, you know, I've done a lot of work, books and so forth, and in identification of birds and getting people to be interested in birds, and just get sort of the you know, I kind of think of myself sometimes almost like a birding evangelist, trying to get people interested in this, because it's really an amazing thing to do, and it adds to your life. It doesn't, you know, you can actually go golfing and go birding while you're golfing. You can, you know, do all sorts of things and still be birding. It's sort of one of those things that is really adds to your life. And also, I wrote a book on birds of California. So if you're starting out and you want a simple field guide and the birds, it's called, there it is, Birds of California, Field Guide to Birds of California, American Birding Association, and it's all photographs. So here it is. This is, this is not like a picture of an amazing wildlife habitat, it seems, but this is my backyard, a corner of my backyard. And as you can see it's not something that special, but you wouldn't believe how many different kinds of birds have popped into my backyard over the years. I mean, we're talking a lot, and a lot of oddities and interesting birds and so forth. And one of the things to think about with your backyard is, of course, if you're a gardener, you're setting up plants that you like and your trees, maybe for shade or whatever. Then you want structure, right? Structure, you want tall things, short things, shrubby things, things with flowers, things with, more of a shrubby nature to them, as well as just sort of, shorter plants and so forth. Structure is always really important in any wildlife. If you, in backyard habitats as well as wild habitats. So you don't want everything to be the same, and you want to give the birds, some aspect of difference. So that's the structure. And you also, I set up feeders, and feeders bring in a lot of birds that eat seeds, as well as, if you set up a hummingbird feeder, you can get birds that eat that, like nectar. But if you set up a feeder, one of the actual type of feeder doesn't really matter too much. I mean, I use sort of the standard little tube things, and you can buy, but the type of seed really does. So if you see this sort of seed mix with all the little round seeds and the little bits and pieces, and it looks like, in a sense, you see this and you say, oh my God, this is going to be really, really great because it's got something for everybody. I found that these seeds are not that good. It's a lot of it is filler stuff that birds really don't like. And, for the most part, it's not the good stuff. Now, if you look at the sunflowers, right, on the left, the black ones, the ones that don't have any stripes, are called black oil sunflower seeds. Those things, the birds love them, all sorts of birds love them. Little chickadees will learn how to open them, and bigger finches and so forth will eat them. So just go get black oil sunflower seeds, and that's it. You don't need to do anything else that's, fancy. I would say, go with that. Now with birds, the finchy birds, a finch is almost like a concept of a bird. There's a whole set of birds in the world called finches that are not necessarily even related to each other, but they all have a beak that is thick and triangular and set up in a sense to crack seeds. So these are two of our local backyard finches, house finch, which is the red one, and then the American goldfinch, which is the yellow one. I'll get to more details on them later. But the whole idea of bill types is really important, especially if you're learning this, or even if you're like already been birding for a while, you sort of forget to think of bill types as a way to understand a lot about a bird. Because, and kids get this immediately. I always tell people, kids especially, imagine you eat with your hands with a fork and knife, but imagine if you just had to like hold your hands to your side, and the only thing you could do is peck at stuff to eat. The only way you get food is from your beak. You could imagine that your beak would become a tool over time, a different kind of tool depending on what kind of food you like. So this is a hooded oriole from my backyard, and the hooded oriole has this long beak, and it actually droops a little bit. And it's a beak that's used for probing at things. You can almost see that. It's like a prober. And while finches have the thick bills that are for cracking, right? There's sort of these more, I would call them sort of robust bills. This is a weaker bill for probing, and orioles probe in all sorts of things, and they also like to probe sometimes for in flowers for nectar. So apart from hummingbirds, orioles will actually nectar for food. Here's an American robin on a lawn in town. And you'll see American robins poking for worms and things. They'll also grab berries. They'll do all sorts of things. And if you look at their beak, it's a very generalized bill, and it's thick. So they can actually probe into the ground with that beak. You know, you can't imagine that oriole with this little skinny bill probing into the ground. It just wouldn't work. So looking at beaks really helps you understand about the biology of the birds, but it also understand how you tell these birds apart, because within a species, they tend to have, you know, they'll have the same big beak type. So finchy birds, we have the house finch, to me, is the most common finch that we will see in the backyards here in Half Moon Bay. And the the house finch has a red color in the male with brown, red and brown, you know, and it, you would think, okay, that's a pretty easy bird to identify, and it is, but there is some other bird later I'll show you that's really quite similar. And one of the things to do is look at where the red is. So you see the red is on the crown, the eyebrow, on the throat, and on the breast, right? And then look at where the brown is. The brown, there's a stripes of brown on the flanks, on the sides, sort of above the legs. Then there's also brown on the back, and then there's this brown area on the cheek that divides the red between sort of the eyebrow red and the throat red. And then you see the female. Now the female has no red, but one of the things to understand, especially if you're you know, new, once you learn the male of a house finch, that might be easier because it has colors. The shape of that bird is the same thing if you're the female. The kind of bill it has, the fact that both house finches kind of look long-tailed, and they're not really fat or anything. They just sort of look, you know, and then they have that bill that's thick, but it also has a rounded aspect to it. The top of the bill is a little bit more rounded than some other finches. So here's a female house finch, and she looked just like a brown thing, and you think, how am I going to identify this ever? Well, you'll know the males, you'll understand the shape, and also the fact that she also has that rounded kind of look to that big, thick bill. She's got a salt and pepper kind of look to her face. There are no bold stripes on the head, nothing. In fact, almost nothing goes on in the head except the eye. So you see that again, the house finch female there, all stripy underneath. And then you start looking in more detail. You look at the bill, the fact that it's thick, but it has a little bit of a round bit of shape to the top part. The salt and pepper look to the head, no obvious stripes, no pale eyebrows, no dark stripes through the eye, none of that. It's just kind of speckled, striped underneath, so streaked, pale under, you know, underparts with browner streaks all the way through in the flanks and so forth. And then on the wings, we often look for, on birds, whether there's a pale bar or something going on. It's these weak, pale wing bars that adds up to this sort of house finch look. But then the shape again, it's sort of long-tailed and sort of average bird-looking shape, if you were going to say something. Now, this is where I want you to, you know, if you're thinking about bird identification, you're new at this, or you're old, you've been doing this forever. I've thought a lot about bird identification because some of the projects I've done, one of them was to write a field guide to the birds of Chile. And one of the odd things that came up from all of this is that we are always talking, as I just did, I showed you these field marks, these things specifically to look at, right? And then on the other hand, you know, I know as an experienced person that the way you actually identify birds is not by looking at all the field marks. That's how you learn the birds. You first learn them by saying, okay, I got to look for this, I got to look for that, and I see. And eventually it all comes together to the point where I don't actually have to see those points anymore to know I'm seeing a house finch or a house sparrow like this photograph. I will just know because I recognize them. And I've thought that this is very much like how people recognize each other. We don't actually look at the field marks of a face. We just recognize the face, you know, in its entirety. Yet, so we can look at something holistically, and then you can also be looking at the details at the same time. So you can see your friend, you know, you can, you know, Peter's there, you recognize Peter, and you might say, oh, you've got new glasses. So you've actually looked at them in a holistic sense, and then you've looked at details like the glasses. Birds are like that too. Your brain is watching them in this holistic sense where you can just say, aha, house sparrow. I don't know why it's a house sparrow. I just seen a house sparrow a bunch of times. I know that's what it is. And then you also might be looking at things in details. And we start out by saying, look at this, look at that, look at this, to get you to understand that a house sparrow, house finch looks like a certain way. But eventually you will just sort of know. That's a magical thing that happens to birders over time. So here's a house sparrow. And I want to say also with house sparrows and common birds is that a lot of experienced birders often don't look at common things anymore. They kind of get bored and they want to find all these unusual things somewhere else. But common birds are the ones you see every day, are the ones that actually teach you a lot. I look at the backyard, I've been doing this for decades, and I still see new things and learn new things from, just watching birds in the backyard. House sparrow, learn the males and the females. There's not too many of them where we live, but they're interesting in that they were brought to North America from Europe, so they're not a native bird to here. And they're the bird that originally was called the sparrow. They're the bird that carries the name sparrow. And then we have other birds that are called sparrows, in fact, are not related to the house sparrow. Like this is our white-crowned sparrow with his black and white crown stripes and that yellowish bill. They're around nesting right now, very close to the shore. So if you're in the coastal prairie out there, you'll be able to see white-crowned sparrows and listen to them sing. One of the coolest things about white-crowned sparrows in the California coast is each place where they breed, they have a local dialect of song. So if you kind of grow up in Half Moon Bay or you come birding in Half Moon Bay and you hear that Half Moon Bay white-crowned sparrow song, it is only found in this part of the coast. That's the only place in the world that these sparrows sing exactly like that. So if you get to San Francisco or you go down Santa Cruz, they sound different. You'll still recognize them as white-crowned sparrows, but their details are different. So that is interesting biology going on right there. California towhee is a real nice backyard bird that we see all the time. And I like to think of California towhees as a bird that you can see at two levels. When you see them more distantly, they're just this larger sparrowy thing without any stripes, nothing. They look kind of boring, small-headed. Their beak is finchy, but a little long. They're very, very long tails. But then you look at them up close and they have all of this funny orangey color. And then you realize they're really quite pretty, but you never realize they were such a good looking bird if you've only seen them at a distance. And this is something that, people sometimes say to me, I'm interested in birds and stuff and I've got an app, but I don't know if I want to get binoculars and get really into it. But binoculars really help you get up close and see things that you might have never seen by just seeing the bird at a distance. So you might know what it is, but you're missing all sorts of details. Even in this close-up picture, you can see the color of the eye. It's chestnut. That doesn't matter, but it's kind of cool to see it, to sort of be that at that level with a creature that you can see it up close. In our, these New World sparrows, American sparrows, one of the ones that comes into the backyard too is the dark-eyed junco, and it looks hooded. It's not a stripy sparrow. It has a dark hood, and it has this funny, like pale pink bill, like no other color, just super, super pale pink. No other bird around here has a beak that's that color. And they have white on the sides of the tail that you can't see in this this picture. And one thing that I would say about them is that they are getting more common. We can talk about this later, but juncos are birds that actually like forest, and they're taking to any place that now has a big tree with some shade, even if it's one or two trees, and they're expanding throughout at least the California coast, are becoming much more common. So there's the dark-eyed junco, and they're here all year round. The California towhee is here all year round. The white-crowned sparrows are here all year round. The house finches are all year round. A lot of backyard birds are actually year-round residents. Here's a purple finch. I remember I told you that the house finch is some bird that's really similar to him. So the guy on the left with the bigger beak, he's the purple finch. And you're gonna say, why would anybody have ever called this thing the purple finch? It looks more red to me than purple. Here's something that I've learned pretty recently, and it's comes from the scientific name purpureus, which at the time meant purple. And what we see as purple today is not what they saw as purple back in the 1800s. Purple used to be a color that was raspberry, and over time we have taken the purple color and made it to mean something that's more violet, more what we see as purple today. So this bird actually has the right name for how people saw what the color purple was back in the 1800s. So it's a weird thing to find out, but to me, it's one of the fun things about birds, because everybody has different interests, right? You know, and how your brain works and what it is. Birds is such a rich, and you know, you can see them as sort of things that you see as beautiful birds. You can go into their history. You can go into the science. You can go into the behavior. Anything that interests you is available as sort of a, you know, sort of segue from birds. So, you know, we can, if you're interested in history, you can look up all the people that these birds are named after, and you know, even the colors like that they could have changed. So here's purple finch anyway. And it's a reddish thing. It's like the house finch, but it's stockier. It's got shorter legs. It's got a bulkier body. It's got a much bigger bill and a shorter tail. So the shape to me is so different once you learn house finch. And the color is richer. There's more color to them. So if you go back to the house finch, you see where the red was, you know, on the eyebrow and the throat and so forth, but on the purple finch is much more extensive. So if we look at this purple finch, bigger bill, more triangular, it doesn't have that round curve to the top of the bill. And then you see that the red is extensive on the head, and it goes right through the cheeks and connects up to the throat. Even though it's a little browner on the cheek, it's just extensive. There's red on the back, and those stripes are not brown like a house finch on the flanks. They actually have reddish tone to them. So it's almost like everything is reddish toned. And there's the house finch again to compare. So it's not just the color. For me, it's the shape. The house finch is slimmer, longer tailed, rounder billed, bigger bill on the purple finch, shorter tailed, stockier, shorter legged. And these are only things that you can sort of see when you look at that two levels, you know, the holistic and also the really detailed look. And this is the female house finch. She has the same shape as the male, stocky, thicker build, you know, shorter tail, shorter leg than the house finch. So this is purple finch. I don't know if I just said house finch. This is the purple finch, but it's more crisply streaked underneath, a big beak, and then it has a pale eyebrow. Then look back at that salt and pepper face of the house finch and the longer tail, the more sort of regular body rather than the fat body of purple finch, house finch. And this is not the best picture, but shows a purple finch up close, and then, you know, that's crisply focused, and a house finch in the back. And you can see the differences in the pattern of the streaking underneath, how the differences in the beak, that little pale stripe on the head of that purple finch, while it's just the unicolored salt and pepper head on the house finch. I should say, okay, you know, we went through there a bunch of field marks, but again, once you get to know these things, you look at less and less and less of those details, and you're seeing them as wholes, and it becomes much easier to identify these birds and just to know, oh, here the purple finches are back, or the house finches are in. But you have to start with some things that kind of differentiate the two, and then associate them with the name, and then you sort of begin to learn what is one and what is the other. And you can see that this is actually, these two species really, really trip people up. They're really, you know, can be hard even for people who've been doing this for a while, but sometimes you also have to simplify it and just kind of look at things that the book might not be telling you, like how, you know, one's short-tailed, the other one's long-tailed. In fact, if I just showed you that one feature, that would help you identify more of them more of the time than seeing all of these other bits. But we tend to look at birds from the face back, and tails tend to be the last thing we notice. So this is sort of a little thing of just assess how how you see things, how you see the world, to make these things, easier to do. One of the backyard birds that you can set up a box for is the chestnut-back chickadee. They take a little hole, and we can talk, you can look up, it's probably the easiest thing, what kind of hole size, box size you need for a chestnut-back chickadee. But the chestnut-back chickadee will take a box, and they're cute little guys. They have these pale cheeks and dark throat, dark cap that outlines this pale cheek. That's probably the easiest way to identify them. And they do have a chestnutty back. They're always in pairs. They're here all year round, and they seem to be almost all over the coast where there are some trees nearby. They're not in areas that don't have trees, so they need trees in the area. Another little guy is the bushtit. Bushtits will come through in these sort of marauding swarms of 20 of them all together, and they do these chirps, and they, as quickly as they arrive, they sort of leave, and they almost seem to be like a construction crew of little guys that come in and then they move on, and you don't know quite what they did, but they did something to that bush, and then they move to a new bush. Bushtits in the breeding season break up into pairs for a little bit of time, but then very quickly get back into their groups again. Now, you look at these two bushtit pictures here. This is sort of the thing of sometimes you look at things in detail, sometimes you don't. One of them on the left is a male, the other one on the right is a female. And the only way you can tell the difference in male and female is by looking at their eye color. Dark eye on the male, pale eye in the female. And that's the kind of thing, again, it's not really that important, but it's kind of fun to do sometimes and to actually see it. And if you ever have bush tits nesting in your backyard, they make this thing that looks like an old sock of a nest. It actually has an entrance up top, and they pop into this hanging basket that is made of spiders' webs and lichen. It's the coolest nest that you can find in a backyard, I'd say, around here. We have the American lesser goldfinch, two other finchy birds. These are males. The real yellow one with the orangey bills, the American goldfinch with the dark cap. And then the greener one with a fuller dark cap and then paler yellow underneath is the lesser goldfinch. And both of them are common on the coast. And the lesser goldfinch has a dark beak. And this extends to the females. The females are much harder to identify. The American's a little bigger, lesser's smaller. Lesser tends to have a more uniform look to the plumage, but it's got a dark beak, while the American has this orange beak at this time of year. So look for that basic bill color as the main thing to separate them at this time. But calls, other things, and size when you see them together is great for separating them. In backyards here, we also have hummingbirds, and we have two species of hummingbirds in the summer. The Anna's hummingbird and Allen's hummingbird. But if you want to see hummingbirds in the backyard, you have to do a couple of things. One of them is put up a hummingbird feeder, but the other thing, if you're a gardener, is plant hummingbird-friendly flowers like salvias, penstemons, the Mexican sage, and these tend to be plants that are actually also drought-resistant. So they're not only pretty, have a lot of flowers. You want to have flowers that are reddish or violet, and sometimes blue. And with a deep kind of shape to them that the hummingbirds like. And you'll see all sorts of hummingbirds coming in if you put the right flowers up. If you ever see a hummingbird nest in your area, they have an interesting setup. They're similarly made with the same stuff that the bush tit makes a nest of. So they have a lot of spiders' webs and lichen on them. And you'll see that the young actually get big pretty quickly. I mean, relative big for a hummingbird in the nest. But one of the things that happens is that the nest, this is amazing, actually can expand because it's made with spiders' webs. So the nest is actually smaller when it's just eggs, and the nest gets bigger as the young kind of make it bigger and, you know, sort of shuffle around them there. And the nest is made to expand. Imagine like if we could just have houses that expand when we have kids. I mean, that'd be amazing. We save a lot of money. But hummingbirds do it. And these are the two hummingbirds that we have. These are the males. Anna's hummingbird with the raspberry all over the head. That's called the gorget. And then the Allen's that has a lot of rusty colors on them, and then has the gorget on the throat only, and then green on the back and green on the crown. So really quite different when you see the males. The females are a little bit more difficult, but I think if you had to sort of simplify it, the Allen's has rusty colors, either on the tail or on the flanks. So you'll see green and rust and white, while the Anna's is green and white with some grayish on the breast. And Anna's a little bigger, Allen's is a little smaller. Anna's is here all year round, so it's your standard hummingbird. The Allen's comes in late in winter, early spring, and they will leave in midsummer. There are other hummingbirds. There's one called Rufous hummingbird that looks a lot like Allen's, but it's a migrant. It just sort of flies through here. It doesn't hang out too much, and that's a whole different kettle of fish in terms of bird identification. They can be a little more difficult. In our backyards, we also have doves. They're the city pigeons, rock doves, rock pigeons that are around in some places. But and if you're in the, you know, we'll get to some of these others in other elements or days that we do these webinars, like the bandtail pigeon. But two of the really common backyard doves are the Eurasian collared dove and the mourning dove. The mourning dove is a native species. It's always been here. The Eurasian collared dove actually came in. It's a complex story, but it's a species from Europe and Asia, sort of, you know, the Middle East, that has arrived in North America and become very common, especially in rural areas in North America. Small towns in the countryside are its preferred habitat. And the Eurasian collared dove, it hoots almost like an owl-like hooting. If you are now thinking, oh, I keep hearing these owls. You're not. You're hearing Eurasian collared doves. If it's in the day, if it's at night, you might be hearing owls. But in the day, I've had a lot of people say, what's this owl-like thing I'm hearing? It's the Eurasian collared dove. And look at them, again, two ways. Shape, the collared dove is more husky, shorter, you know, thicker, broader tail, bigger headed. And then the mourning dove, which is on the right, has a longer tail, more pointed. She's more elegant looking, smaller headed, and so forth, slimmer. But then look at where the black is. Eurasian collared dove has a black ring on the neck. And then otherwise it looks pretty, a little gray or brown right here. Then the mourning dove has black speckles up above the in the wings, you know, above sort of the and behind the legs. It goes black kind of circles, and then it's got like a black teardrop underneath the eye. So if you look at where the black is, you can identify them. But if you just look at their shape, you can identify them. And if you actually can meld those together, you can identify them even more quickly. So it depends, again, how you see things and how this identification stuff works for you. So I'm going to start wrapping up sort of the photographs here and get into some questions, but we'll be next time kind of broadening out from the backyard to birds in the neighborhood, things like violet green swallows and ravens and jays and other things that show up around here. And I know it was a whirlwind of some species and real detail on others, but I think I'm going to try to mix it up like that for you to sort of get different aspects of this. And as these talks go on, we'll be seeing more birds that are special, because you're starting sort of in the backyard and things are most common, and then going into the harbor and the beaches and other things where we have other things that are of interest. Again, alvarosadventures.com is where you can find me. You can even ask me questions over there and send me emails. We'll now deal with some questions. I just wanted to point out that this of course, we've all been living with this issue of COVID-19 and how it's changed our lives. And one of the things that, we were not knowing what was going to happen was on our boat trips heading out to the Fairlawns, and also, watching seabirds, whales just from Pillar Point Harbor. But just last week, we did get guidance on how it's going to happen, and we will be running trips starting July 18th with a smaller number of people on the boats, social distancing, and various other changes we've had to make, and that's fine. I'm really happy we're going to get to do them. And one thing also, just want to remind you, some of these birds we're going to be seeing are here because of the work of conservationists and people doing the work like Coastside Land Trust. And if you're, a California resident, and really, or especially if you're in the Half Moon Bay area, go and donate either time, money, efforts, or even just get other people interested in the work of the Land Trust. That'd be great. So here's some questions that I'm getting. Spotted towhee and black-headed grosbeak. How do you separate those two? I didn't talk about them. I'll probably put them in the next week's session, and just say that one thing is behavior. The towhees tend to be low in shrubs in very different habitat that the grosbeaks, like trees. So think about behavior. And also the grosbeaks, when they're singing, the males have really good song, like a robin type song, sort of flute-like, complex. The towhees have a very weak trill as their song. So, think about things that aren't just color to identify them. There's a question of, do seeds attract rodents? It depends. They can. I tend to every so often, sometimes every few days, we'll rake up the stuff on the ground and put that in the compost. There are seed mixes that are more expensive where there's no shell. It's just the seed, the inside of the seed, and the birds actually never let that stuff drop. So in the end, it's much cleaner. So if you're really worried about rodents, and you can try it and see, you can always stop feeding. There's actually no evidence that birds become dependent on you. So if you stop feeding, and I often do this when I go on trips, I will just stop feeding if I have to. The birds find their other food, or they go to other feeders. They figure it out. Don't worry. Don't that they're dependent on you. Don't have that stress. There's no evidence that happens. House finches like drinking hummingbird nectar. I've actually seen it recently. I hadn't seen it before, but there's one feeder I have, a hummingbird feeder, where the house finches have been drinking, and I think it's got something wrong. The little flower is broken or something, so there's a little drippy sugary thing. So birds are like people. Give them free sugary stuff, they're all over it. Let's see, recommended place to buy the California Field Guide. That's a good question. They used to have it in the bookstore downtown in Half Moon Bay. I'm not sure if they do anymore. I haven't been there for a while. I don't know. But any bookstore in Half Moon Bay, if you're from here, would be able to order it. And you can also go online and order it, of course, or go. I wish I would, be able to answer that a little bit better. How can I tell a swallow from a swift? That's a good question. Swallows are a little bit more graceful in their flight style. Their swifts look mechanical. Okay, we don't have too many swifts on the coast. Every so often we'll have white-throated swifts. Most of the swallowy swift things you see are all swallows here on the coast. So it's different if you go into San Mateo, the other side of the hill, where there are more swifts. But also look at the tail. If you see a distinct tail on your swallow swift, it's most likely a swallow. Most of the swifts, and much of where we are here, have rudimentary tails, unless you see, or they keep the tail all folded up so that you don't really see a forked or notched tail. Swifts that have long tails tend to close them up. Swallows with long tails will close or open depending on what they're doing. As they move, they'll actually open the tail. So look for that. And is the house sparrow same as the English sparrow? Yes, it is. And I've often thought this is interesting, that the English sparrow was an it's a pretty old name. The original name for this house sparrow was just the sparrow. It was called sparrow. That was it. And then when people started trying to, make names make more sense in an international context, they gave it the name the English sparrow, and that stuck because it hasn't been officially the English sparrow for a long time. House sparrow is the name that people use now, but somehow English sparrow has stuck, and that's unusual. Often when names change in birds, the new one takes over, and the old one doesn't remain. But it hasn't been officially the English sparrow since probably, I don't know, the 50s or something, or maybe less, maybe older. I don't know why that name is stuck. But, and question about the dark-eyed junco. If the Oregon variety is a subspecies, yeah. Juncos are actually one of the most interesting groups to look at in terms of species and subspecies and the evolution. It turns out scientists have found out that juncos spread very quickly from the sort of older lineages that were in Guatemala and in Mexico, and then they went throughout the US and Canada in what they call, an adaptive radiation. And it's very, very new, just tens of thousands of years, but they've actually, each type has become different looking. So we have slate-colored junco types in the east and in the north, and we have gray-headed juncos. And here, the type of dark-eyed junco we have is called the Oregon junco, that has this sort of brown back and a hooded look. And it is a subspecies. In fact, it's a group of subspecies. So if I went to look at an Oregon type junco here versus one in British Columbia versus one in the Sierras, they're actually slightly different. They're all considered Oregon junco. But if I remember right, the one that we have has even a different old name called Thurber's junco. So there you go. I don't know how I remember this stuff, but I just do. Lucia's curious. Hi, Lucia. Do all birds of the same species have the same color eye? No, actually, sometimes, especially birds that have eyes that are really red, right? When they're young, when they're young to about teenager age, they're brown. So a lot of red and sometimes yellow eyes go from brown and eventually turn red or yellow when the bird is an adult. And it's totally the opposite in the red-tailed hawk. Starts out with a yellow eye. So in the nest, little babies have yellow eyes, but adults have brown eyes. So sometimes it's age. Age is the most common way birds, or most common reason why there's an eye color change. But like in the bushtits, it's very unusual to have an eye color difference between the boys and the girls. So that's one of the reasons I pointed it out. Do goldfinches migrate through? I see a lot of them in the fall eating seeds. They're actually, goldfinches will move through. We have them year round, both lesser and American, but definitely I see more of them here in my backyard in breeding season in summer. But they can show up at any time and their numbers really fluctuate. There's a relative that they have called the pine siskin that's coming around every so often right now. And they're even more nomadic. Like sometimes we will have lots of them that come in from the north, and then we have some that breed locally. So this is two, kind of complexities that go on here. Advice on how to keep pesky squirrels off the bird feeder. This is an interesting question with some, if you want to look for squirrel, feeder advice, people in Eastern North America seem to have all the gadgets and stuff. One of the oddities that we've had on the coast side here in Half Moon Bay is we have had no squirrels, no gray, tree squirrels around up until now. We've had about the last 3 to 4 years, squirrels coming in from the other side of the hill. And these again are non-native squirrels. They're eastern gray squirrels. that are coming in that were introduced, I think, to Stanford for some reason, way back, and they're coming in. So I, as of yet, haven't seen one squirrel in my backyard ever here, and it was a one-day wonder, and I haven't had to deal with this. So I would look up things. So I'm not really experienced with keeping squirrels away, but oh, they've got feeders that flip and do this and that. And you might want to go, if you're local, to the Birders Garden is a store that's in San Carlos, and they have everything for the backyard birder and so forth. And that's a place too that I could likely have my book. So I would go there. A Bay Area backyard, certain types of plantings. Again, structure. So some shrubby things, some taller things, some shorter things. Try to go, drought tolerant or native or at least regional. Salvias, with the hummingbird potential that they have, and some of them are from Southern California, other parts of California, and that's fine. You don't, some people are if it depends what you're doing. If you want to have a fully native garden and local, very different than a garden that has plants from California that don't take much water versus a broader, more expansive. I'll use plants from all over the world as long as they're drought tolerant. But structure and some colorful hummingbird plants, because a lot of other birds and bees like them. Lupins are plants that I also like for bees, native bees, bumblebees like the bush lupins. And as far as structure, I have an apple tree too. So, get apples and I get a little height. So there you go. Identifying birds by song, that is, once you sort of identify them visually, then you can move on to song. And it is a different, some people do really well with bird song identification, other people struggle with it a little bit more. But I find one of the things that's best if you have time and are into this is actually anytime you hear something you don't recognize, and once you already have an idea of what birds look like, and identify most of them, or have a good app with them, is to chase down a song. So go and find the bird that's making that song, look at it, and then go, oh, that's a white-crowned sparrow. The activity of actually chasing down the bird, looking for it, you're seeing the habitat, and you eventually see the bird and you're hearing it, allows you to start actually remembering it. There's a whole science to how you remember things, but that event of going through a journey to find an answer allows you to remember that more so than if I just played you on an app, what a white-crowned sparrow sounds like, and try to make you remember that. So do the journey. It takes more time, but it's actually more fun too. How do you know you have a black-chin hummer? That's good. Well, if you're in Half Moon Bay and you see a black-chin hummingbird, let us know, because we want to see it too. That's a really rare one here. But if you're other parts of California, they're actually around. Black-chin hummingbirds, if you don't see the male or the gorget color, they have very long bills. They're one of the longest billed hummingbirds around this part of California. So look for their shape. Small, very long billed. And they'll be noticeably smaller than Anna's hummingbird if you have them side by side. And their beak will look longer. And let's see. Jan, how you doing? Eurasian collar doves getting less common here on the coast. Actually, I think they are. And this is not, so backtrack, Eurasian collar doves were a bird that was introduced, and it became very common, very quickly exploded onto the scene throughout North America and in California. And it was sort of all over the place. And recently I'm seeing fewer and fewer and fewer. And this is not that unusual in introduced species of birds, that they have sometimes a big boom, and then something happens, whether it's disease that they capture from a native bird or some other aspect of their biology that changes over time, that they suddenly then start kind of coming down in numbers. And I think we're seeing that with collared doves, which is not a bad thing. I think we had kind of too many of them, but there we go. Yeah, somebody asked if the doves do sound different, the mourning dove and the Eurasian collared dove. Yes, the real owl-like sound that's loud is the Eurasian collared dove. Often mourning dove, it just sort of blends into the background. It's not a bird that a lot of people sort of really pay attention to, but the collared dove is very loud and very obvious. So yes. And somebody else, I assume Robin is local, asked about crows. There seem to be a lot of crows. And I'm going to next time talk about crows and ravens. But crows have, and ravens overall have been on the increase on the coast. And right now, if you see ravens, especially a group of them, about 15 or 20 together, these are the teenagers. It's like the gang of teenagers. The adults are out breeding somewhere, probably in the hills, a little further away and here and there. But this group of young ravens, and you can tell because they're actually missing some feathers on the wings. They're molting right now. Adults don't change their feathers till after they breed. So if a raven or a crow is changing feathers now in the breeding season, it means it's a non-breeder, and it's probably because it's a young one, it's a teenager. So they're really obvious because they're always fooling around. They're very intelligent birds, and the ravens at the cliffside playing, messing around. Sometimes they'll even perch close to dogs just to annoy them. Yeah, I think some of you might have seen this. Those are basically annoying teenagers. So, but we can talk about crows and ravens next time. Do hummingbirds fight? And is it species, sex related, or is everybody? Hummingbirds are beautiful, but they're really mean. Really, and one of the reasons is in the world, there are two kinds of hummingbird species. We only have one kind, which are called territorial hummingbirds. And not territorial in the sense that, they protect a place to breed in. They actually protect a food source. They can protect a feeder. And they will do this. And in other parts of the world, in the tropics, there are some birds, hummingbirds called trapliners that will never fight. They just go, if somebody is protecting the flower, they'll just leave. And these birds will go feed on the flower, move, and they're never in the same place at one time. So it's very different kind of behavior. But yeah, the males often are the ones that, especially male annas, young male annas will defend territory around a feeder or some flowers. And they're pretty mean, and they will chase away anybody that comes close, other males, other females. And I have a friend who said basically the way, if you're Israel hummingbird, fan, and there's a point in time where you can put up enough feeders that no one male or young or can dominate the area, and they lose control. And once there's loss of control in a hummingbird area, then lots of hummingbirds can come in because nobody can dominate it. There's no way to dominate 4 or 5 feeders. So his answer was just put up more feeders. I have limits. I mean, I do 2 feeders, but there you go. It depends. Pacifica, saw some swallows yesterday in the backyard. What kind of swallows are native to Pacifica? We have a lot of swallows I would say 5, 6 species, around here. But if you're in a backyard in this area, probably violet green swallows this time of year might be the ones you're seeing, but the other one is barn swallow. So if they have really white chests, probably violet greens. If they have rusty kind of cinnamony chests, barn. Here's a good question. Susan asks if they've seen a few house finches that look orangey instead of reddish pink. Do you have to worry about this? So this is interesting. You know how you've probably read this or heard about it a million times, that flamingos get their color from the brine shrimp that they eat, and they have to incorporate that color into the feathers. Well, most red orangey pigments, they're called carotenoids, actually have to be ingested and then turn into that color. So carotenoids don't have to be orangey in the food that they ingest. So you can get carotenoids from seeds and other things, and sometimes even insects. So those birds are actually, those finches are grabbing the food and incorporating them into their body, and then that red color comes out. And some finches, especially young ones, sometimes can't feed as well, and they will come up with orangey colors or yellowish. And it's actually quite common, and it's not a problem. It's just a difference. And those individuals next year might be fine and look reddish, but now they look orangey. So I wouldn't worry about it, about your feeders being, not having the right food or something. Especially if you have black hole sunflower, you're doing well. So it's just one of the biologies of color. So next time you see an orangey house finch, think of the flamingo. Maybe not as flashy as a flamingo, but they're doing the same thing as flamingos. Okay, I think is this the hook?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Alvaro, for such an educational experience today. I know there are a number of questions that we'll be getting to later, but thank you for this rich presentation. And from everyone, all of the people who are attending who can't clap, we're grateful to you for being here.
Oh.
For all of you who are here and attending, thank you so much for being here today. Just a reminder that you can check out the work that Alvaro is doing, his tours, his trips, some of the research and conservation that he's involved with at alvarosadventures.com. And there's links, if you'll just click on the chat here, you'll see the links to that, to his Alvaro Adventures. Please join us next week. We will be, as Alvaro shared, he's going to be talking about birds around town. For those of you who asked, there's a number of you that had questions that were not answered today. Alvaro did a great job of getting down that list, but there are quite a number of questions. So for those of you who have questions, we are going to be sending a follow-up email in the next couple of days for how to get your questions answered. So to be able to target some of those. And I think some of those also can be answered in some of the upcoming presentations. But also in the email that you'll receive will be a link to the recording for this, so that a number of you have asked to have the recording so that you can share this with people that didn't get to make it today. And it'll be up on our YouTube in a couple of days. So make sure to send that to you as well. Also, you can hop on our website and sign up for the next couple of webinars. There'll be the subsequent following Saturdays, so at 10 o'clock, same time here, Pacific time. You can hop on our website, and there's a link to that too in the chat box. Or so if you want to make a donation, thanks to Alvaro for reminding us about Coastside Land Trust, and that it's a fantastic nonprofit organization that is able to do this and all of the land conservation and work that it's doing because of the generosity of donations from people. So if you'd like to donate, there's a link to that as well. All of that's on our website, pretty easy to do. And yeah, thank you again so much for being here today. And we will see you all again next week. Thank you very much, Alvaro.
No problem.